Hey everybody, this is Tony from FretBuzz. Today I'd like to talk about an idea that comes frequently into the studio regarding how to practice more efficiently, as well as how to actually study more efficiently, especially when it comes to learning new musical ideas or studying theoretical concepts and whatnot. Oftentimes when students come to see me in private teaching, one of the common questions I'll always get is like, well, how did you get to your level of musicianship? What did you do to actually make your guitar playing sort of come together and make a lot of progression in a kind of fast way? Did you practice for hours and hours? Did you practice every day? How much did you practice? To what degree did you incorporate different songs, and etc. And my response to all of those inquiries with students is that I try to make it really consistent on a daily basis. But at the same time, I always wanted to adopt the philosophy of learning new things on a daily basis. So for me, practicing was kind of a really weird definition, and one that in the very beginning of my musical career, I really didn't have a good understanding on. But as I progressed as a player, I found that I was practicing less in terms of the definition of what a practice is, and adopting more of a philosophy of playing on a daily basis and studying new things on a daily basis. For me, the amount of time you put in, there is a lot of value to that in terms of how much time daily should go into a practice routine. But at the same time, it's really about what you do with that daily practice routine that tends to yield better results than if I just went ahead and played 8 hours a day on scales and arpeggios and chords. And if you're anything like me, I tend to have more of what I call a sticky mind. And what that really is just my terminology for meaning that I get bored very quickly on certain ideas. My mind tends to get stuck on one or two things, and I burn out on them. And I really find no flexibility in my creativity as a musician. So in my early years, we're talking like, 15, 16, 17, getting ready for my attendance to the Berklee School. Yeah, I was doing a lot of 8 to 10 hour practice days on scales and arpeggios and chords, but really found that just took me to a certain plateau, and then I really didn't learn any kind of new ideas. And it wasn't until I really started the teaching part of my career where my daily practice routine moved away from technical workouts into more of, okay, well, every day I sit down and I have a session of playing and a session of studying. And what I would do with that session time is I'd hit the clock and say, okay, I'm going to practice. I'm going to play and study from, let's say, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. And in that 4-hour window, not only am I going to, try to play technically and groove to things that I wanted to learn, new riff ideas and whatnot, but a certain window of that practice session was really meant for and set aside for studying something. So I'd pull a lot of books. I mean, I love to read. In my other job, I teach literary studies and language studies. So I've always been kind of a natural reader anyway, but I've always adopted reading musical text as part of my playing routine. So let's say for a 30-minute window, or maybe even longer, an hour, I would read a new musical idea within a certain book and really try to understand it. And then I would take that musical idea and I'd apply it to my guitar, or apply it to, let's say, another instrument that I wanted to work on, and then work on that and work that out. And then I'd actually create new exercises or new riff ideas or new musical phrasing around what I read. And I would do that for, let's say, a day or two, and then I'd move on to a new musical concept in a couple of days from a book, and so on. So I was always kind of digesting new material. And that, to me, when I started really working on that, that was a tremendous impact on how I developed as a player and as a general musician. So there was a certain level where, yeah, the switch was thrown. I went from being guitar player, guitar technician, to a musician. Simply by adopting a different philosophy, a different attitude in my set aside time for really looking at musical concepts in my room, where most of us practice and play, right, is in the four walls of our room. In some ways, a very kind of isolating process. But if it's done really effectively, we can theoretically get away from just practicing scales and arpeggios and chord forms. And all that is incredibly valuable, especially in the formative years of your musicianship. But there has to be a certain place where you read and take in, or look at video and take in new musical ideas that you work on and apply and assimilate into your guitar style or your bass style or your drum style or whatever the case is. Another thing that I would really work on in my playing, studying, practice time session work was I'd learn new instruments as well. This is actually something I've worked on more, I think, as I've matured as a musician, but I always watch and study what other musical players do. So I'd watch drummers and I'd say, what are they doing in certain rudiments? What are some things that they're doing to move the hands? Like what is open hand style in drumming as opposed to the cross hand style? And I'd say to myself, okay, can I synthesize, which literally breaks down to mean join ideas together. Can I synthesize what I'm seeing in drum work and drum technique and apply that into guitar work? Are there relationships? Are there cross connections? And sometimes they're not overt. They're not just quickly right in front of you, but you can actually find a connection in some way. And once you nail that connection down, you actually can take that and develop that into something new that you're working on. A good example of this is something I talked about in the adaptive right hand lesson, where I would look at bass players and look at their slap techniques and say, ooh, that's neat. What are they doing in slap style that I can adopt and translate into guitar work? And over time, it just really works for you. Lastly, students talk to me a lot about how to study in their practice routines, how to study theory. Is there a way to take what's in theory in books and translate that into something we can actually use in a very organic way and understand every day? And I tell students, your goal is to make strides in your studying practice time daily to learn new things. One of the very first exercises that I've developed when I got into this daily studying practice routine was how to really understand intervals better. The practice, the study of looking at musical intervals for some people is quite challenging because they don't really make sense at first. It's based on a mathematical relationship of the scale. Some people gravitate toward that very easily, especially if they're mathematically inclined. For others like myself, who really didn't have that, I had more of an artistic brain. I had to find a way in to really learn what intervals were, how they kind of work in relationship to my other guitar work, and how to really understand it so I can apply it. So this is something that Fret Buzz, the podcast, will probably address in a future conversation episode about how to really apply and develop interval practice as musicians. But for now, let's just go ahead and say what an interval really is. The interval is literally a space between two scale tones. So for instance, if you're tonicizing a certain key, let's say the key of G, which has one accidental, F sharp, the tonic is G, that's number one. Well, if we take the entire one octave scale and we number them from 1 through 8, each number getting a scale tone of that G major form, the interval would be the distance between each of the scale tones. So for instance, a second would literally be the next whole step, so G to A. A third would be G to B, the fourth would be G to C, and then so forth up to the octave. So one of the dangers in musical application is speed, or I should say one of the obstacles is speed, doing these things in a relatively quick fashion. So my students would come to me all the time and they'd say, well, I don't understand how I can think quickly through intervallic practicing or intervallic work when I'm actually in a chord form or in a scale form and I have to get to the sixth in the key really quickly. How do I do that? So I designed this game that I want to share with you guys, and it's called the License Plate Game. And I've taught this for many years in studio, and here's the basics of it. We all know that most states in the US and their transportation license plates will have a mixture of letters and a mixture of numbers. Where I come from in Pennsylvania, it was always the following. On the left side of a license plate usually had 3 letters, And on the right-hand side, you had 4 numerical characters. So I'll just imagine one that we can write down. If you have a sheet of paper, go ahead and write this down. So on the left side of your paper, write 3 letters, A, D, and F. On the right-hand side, let's write the numerical characters 4, 1, 6, 2. All right, so what we have now is we have a combination of ADF and on the right-hand side, 4, 1, 6, 2. Your practice challenge is to quickly determine the intervallic nature of how those 2 letters and numbers work together. So what I would always do is we start with the first letter in the sequence, which in this case is A. And in our brains, we have to quickly do this. Imagine we're on stage. We have to quickly tonicize A major. So A becomes 1. In our minds, we have to determine how many accidentals do we have. Now, the key to this, of course, is knowing your circle of fifths. So knowing how many, all your 12 chromatic keys and the accidentals that are contained in each one is a good starting point. I know that in the key of A, we have 3 accidentals, 3 sharps, F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp. So in your brain, you actually literally write out the scale from 1 to 8 with those accidentals in place. So we have A, B is who, C sharp is 3, D is 4, E is 5. F sharp is 6, G sharp is 7, and then 8 is the octave A. Okay, now back to the license plate. So the left-hand side, we have A as 1. We migrate to the right-hand side, we pick the first number, which is 4 in our sequence. I say to myself quickly, in the key of A major, what is the 4th? If you know it, D. Okay, so I catalog that. We go back to A as the tonic again, go back to the right-hand side. What is the 1 interval? Well, of course, it's just the tonic A. Now continue on through the right-hand side numbers. What is the 6th? The number 6 in that interval license that we wrote out. 6 would be F sharp, and then of course the 2 in that last number on the sequence. The 2nd in the key of A is B. Okay, so we just completed the 4, 1, 6, 2 in the key of A major. Now we go back to the left-hand side of your paper. D is the 2nd letter that we actually have in there. So now we make D the tonic of D major. How many accidentals do we have in D major? 2, F sharp and C sharp. We think of a scale with those 2 in there. Now we go back to the right-hand side, same 4 numbers, do the exact same sequence again. The 4th in D is G. The 1st in D is D. The 6th in D, we actually have the B. And the 2nd in D, we have E. Okay, now you see how I got kind of caught up? I don't know if you're watching this really quickly. Even this happens to me. I had to really think in my mind, what was the 6th in D? Oh, I have to think of the 5th first. For me is A is the way to think about it. And I go up 1 from there. Okay, so, speed takes practice. Okay, and then lastly, we go back to the left-hand side. And I believe we said F was the last tonic. So now we think of F major as tonic 1. Now, F major is one of the keys that contains the flats as accidentals. We have 1 flat, B flat in the key of F major. We construct a scale with that in there. Now to the right-hand side, 4 numbers, 4, 1, 6, 2. Okay, the 4th in F is B flat, the 1st is F, the 6th is C, and the 2nd is G. Okay, so now quickly our intervals there. Now, to make it even cooler, what I used to tell students is once you got it going forward, we reverse the process. So now go back to A real quick, jump over to the 4th, and I say to my students, okay, now let's make this tricky. Let's go backwards. Which key will give us A as the 4th of its particular tonic? Okay, so think about what that would be for a second and how that would really work in there. Same thing. Which key would give us A as the 1? That's easy, the key of A. Which key would give us A as the 6th, in this case C major, right? And in which key would A be the 2? And that would be the key of G. And you kind of keep going that way. And by the way, I just kind of glossed over this, but you would actually have in, let's say, in A, we have to kind of backtrack a little bit. So it would be G flat or G sharp, right? And so it'd be the key of E would be there. So you can see how I even have to backtrack in my mind that way as well. Continue on that process a little bit. So then we keep going. So in which key, the next letter in the sequence was D, I believe we said. In which key would D be the 4? That would be the key of A. Which key would D be the 1? Key of D. Which key would D be the 6th? And we're kind of backtracking here. That would be F, right? F natural, right? F major. And in which key would D be the 2? And that would be C. Okay, and the last one I think we said was F again. So in which key would F be? The 4, the key of C major. In the 1, it would be F major. Which one would be in the 6? That'd be A flat, because don't forget we have to be careful there with where the accidentals sit. And in which key would F be? The 2, and that would be an E flat. Okay, so that's basically how we do it. And you saw again, as an experienced, player, musician, teacher, sometimes I have to think through the sequencing, but that's okay. I mean, it would be great to have it like fire off the cuff, and with practice we get through all 12 keys. But the beauty of applying some kind of practicing like this is that when we do it in our room and we make some errors and we kind of stumble along the way, or we hit these really kind of beautiful progressions of musical growth, and we figure things out, we make a lot of good connections in musical study and musical navigation. Then we get to the stage, or we get into a studio session, we can think on our feet quickly, and that translates. We don't really have to, like hang up on a chord form or in a scale form on a fretboard and think, oh, what is this interval here now? We just automatically go there, and eventually it does become kind of second nature. Okay, so again, to kind of wrap this up, make sure that, if you're going to adopt the style of studying, practicing on a consistent daily basis, try to blend in new concepts, new ideas that we read about, that we see, as much as possible, and integrate them in with just daily practicing. Work on that license plate idea. Send us any comments or feedback, maybe about some variations on exercises you can work at, and you're trying to figure out for yourself, and maybe some revelations you guys have in your own work. We would love to hear them. Don't forget Fret Buzz every Tuesday on YouTube. We have a new episode coming out tomorrow, actually, episode 4. Really great conversational stuff. We look forward to seeing you guys really soon. Thanks, and talk soon.